I'm Jake with the Fireside Tattoo Network, and welcome to another episode of Fireside Technique. Today's episode is all about making color decisions within your tattoos. You know, what inks are you pouring in those caps and why? Do you have a good reason for it? But aside from that, this is kind of a unique episode because it's actually one of the video modules from our Fireside Foundations course, which if you follow this show or follow our podcast, you've probably heard me talk about foundations a good bit lately. We've gotten a lot of questions about it, a lot of inquiries about foundations and what it is exactly. So I thought I would just pluck one of the video modules from the course and release it as a technique episode to give you a better idea. So I hope you like it, hope you get some value from it. Thanks for supporting us. Hey, welcome to the Fireside Foundations Practical Application module. Today we're going to focus a little more on color and edge. You know, this entire course has been centered around shape and value. And the purpose of this practical application video will be to show how all of our color and edge decisions support the shape and value decisions that we made on the front end. So let's clip in on an actual tattoo here, and what you're looking at is the healed version of my first pass. And the thing that I want to point out is, even though there's a good bit going on here, there are a lot of elements and it's more fully rendered, it was approached in the exact same way that we approached these core modules, modules 1, 2, and 3 in particular, where we thought in terms of shape first, what are the basic shapes that make this up? Where's my light source? And then, just like Adam did in video 1, 2, and 3, he blocked in all of his shadow, or I blocked in all of my shadow shapes and left my light shape standing skin tone. That helped me to simplify the entire design. It helped me to think about the way that I want it to sit on the skin, on the leg. It helped me to find balance between light and dark shapes, and it helped me to identify how the light actually turned the spheres, cylinders, and cubes that make up this design. Once I had just separated my lights from my darks, I went in just like every other time, and I pushed my contrast. I got as dark as I felt comfortable getting, or actually I got black. I got pretty dark in the background here, and then I dropped into some medium grays, and then I went to skin tone. And if you look at this and you squint down, there's a lot happening, but there are really only about 4 total values. We've got the darkest dark in the background, we've got a medium gray, maybe we have a little bit lighter gray where some of those wispy hairs of the dragon kind of meet the waves, and then we have skin tone, and that's it. I didn't need 6, 8, 10 different versions of grays. I really want to make the fewest decisions possible. I want to be deliberate in my decision making, and adding more values and more subtle transitions at this phase wouldn't have served any purpose other than just to complicate the design. So now we're ready to go into color. Now as we get into color here, I want you to take a look at my setup, and basically I have black, white, and 4 colors set out in the caps here. I've got a medium dark red, I've got a really deep red at the top, and then I've got a lime green, and I've got kind of a muted, kind of a king's blue. I don't know what it's called in tattoo ink, but it's kind of like a king's blue would be in paint. And then black and white, and that's it. And so whenever I'm weighing these colors out, I'm not thinking so much about the colors, I'm thinking more about where those colors sit on the value scale. So whenever I was doing this, I was conscious of the idea that I wanted a lighter blue, a blue that sat closer to white on the value scale, and I wanted my reds to be on the darker side of the value scale. Now, why would I keep the color palette so minimal here? Well, for one thing, I think it's a good idea when you're just starting to implement the principles of shape, value, edge, and color. I think it's a good idea to keep it simple, just so that you don't feel overwhelmed and don't feel obligated to use 25 colors that you get out. Secondly, I think that anytime you limit your color palette, you'll automatically get more color harmony. The harmony of the colors will look like they belong together. You'll start mixing in and out of complementaries. If you notice, I've got a red and I've got a green, so I have complementaries, and they sit in different places on the value scale, which when I add black and white into that mixture, we'll get some really interesting off tones that you probably wouldn't be able to just find out of a tube. Or if you did, you wouldn't know exactly what colors you were looking for out of a tube. So as I start working in here, on the dragon, I'm going into these wispies right here where we cut in, and I'm using that light blue, and I'm using a mag. Now I'm not going in here with a liner and getting really crisp, clean edges. from those wispy hairs into the background waves, because I'm thinking about my hierarchy and I'm thinking about my edges. Now, I don't want a really sharp edge that draws a lot of attention right here. I have sharp, bold edges in front of it in the kind of horns and in the head of the dragon. So what I want here is a soft, subtle transition. I want I want like kind of a rolling edge that just kind of falls into the background, almost dissipates. And so that's what I'm focused on here. So I'm going over what were my lightest grays with a nice light muted blue. So whenever that settles in, whenever it heals, it won't read as a really hard and defined edge. Now, I don't want to get too much into technique, but it's important to be slow and deliberate when using these really muted colors or these light colors that are mixed down with a lot of white. The irritation of the skin will tend to push through really quickly, and it makes it hard to read just how solid that color is. So I tend to stay nice and slow and then get away from it for a little while and let some of the redness fall out of it. Now, as I move over into the petals of the flower, you can see that I'm starting to use kind of an off muted purpley tone. And what that is, it's basically just that medium red, that lipstick red mixed down with the green and or the blue. And then I've either touched black or white just to darken or lighten it just a little bit. And that's my kind of the point I was trying to make earlier. Some of these really muted off tones that I get, I wouldn't be able to get anything as harmonious if I just tried to buy it out of and pour it out of a tube and use it. It just wouldn't, the chances of it being the mixture that I want are pretty slim. And I know for sure that I can get that mixture that I want whenever I'm just using these colors that are already on my palette that I'm using in pure form in other parts of the design. As I start to work on this little pearl of wisdom, it's basically just a sphere, but it is a light source in this design. I am thinking of it in my light family, so even whenever I cross over and start to get into that form shadow, core shadow area, it's not getting too dark. It's still probably a 3 or so on the value scale. So when we were doing our shape studies, we were letting that form shadow get a little bit darker, and then we let the cast shadow kind of have that crisp edge off of it. And whenever that shape was standing on its own, that made perfect sense. But in this context, I don't want the pearl to get all that dark because I want it to read as a source of light. So that's just another thing that I'm always keeping in mind and that you should keep in mind whenever you're thinking general to specific, whenever you're thinking about the hierarchy of the shapes. That dragon is the most important shape. So everything else in this design, I'm asking, does this decision support the dragon? Does it drive the eye to the dragon, or does it distract you from the dragon? Does it draw your eye towards it? Over here, we're on the shadow side of the dragon. If you look, the light's coming from the opposite side, and this really should be all in shadow where these petals are now, where these cherry blossoms are that I'm working on right now. And the reason that they're not is because I wanted to get some kind of pure bright color. So I didn't want to lay a lot of gray washes in there and then put color over it because it would end up more muted than I might have wanted. This left me the decision to make whether or not I wanted to do a nice bold bright flower or whether I wanted to do a more muted flower, and I'll make those decisions now. But this is where the value of that color comes into play. This red is a fairly deep red, so it makes sense that it sits over here on the shadow side. So I have a decision to make here. Do I want to use a bright light red? Do I want to mix that down and get some bright pinks in there? Or do I want to keep it a little more subdued, a little bit on the darker side of the value scale? And I chose to keep it on the darker side of the value scale as a whole because it sits kind of in that recess behind the dragon. I don't want it to have it wouldn't be hit with a lot of light. So if I were to strike it with a lot of light and have some nice strong pops of color, well, suddenly it jumps forward and starts to compete with the body of the dragon, which catches a lot of light. So with those two elements right next to each other, the last thing I want is those cherry blossoms jumping forward and competing with those scales on the back of the dragon. I want the dragon to be the dominant element. Now, when I'm thinking about those cherry blossoms, you can see that there are subtle temperature shifts, subtle value shifts in them. And that's one of the tricky things to me. I constantly have to step back and ask myself, am I treating these things as a whole? All these cherry blossoms together, do they read as a whole, or am I drawing too much attention to the individual flowers? What I don't want to do is to have every flower different than the flower next to it so that they become all chaotic and they start to all jump forward and grab attention. I just want them to support the dragon. So I kind of think of the water, all those waves as an entire shape on their own. I think of all the cherry blossoms as one shape, and I think of the dragon as a shape. So I'm dealing with three major shapes here. And even though there are, 15, 20 flowers in the design, I'm thinking of them as a whole. Now, as I come back and I start laying these light, kind of muted blues in here, I want you just to visualize for a second if I had used something like a true blue, like a really intense, bright blue in those waves, and what that would do to your eye up against the bright reds of those flowers. You would have two really intense colors that are one warm, one cool, right against each other, that can easily become heavy and overwhelming and just and cause a lot of distraction. You wouldn't even know to look at the dragon. It would just be these two high key colors screaming at you. And that's the last thing that I wanted. That's why I think it's so important to think of where your colors sit on the value scale first, then think of how intense are they. If one is intense, let's make sure that the other one is muted, right? So we're always thinking about contrast here. We don't want two really intense colors up against each other. Right here, I'm blending into the healed grays in those waves, and I'm just saturating right where those grays fall into the skin tone because I want that edge to be nice and soft, just like on the front side. I'm looking for nice, simple, soft transitions and edge. I don't want really stark edges in those waves, on the insides of those waves. The waves draw enough attention on their own just because of the way they're designed. They're a negative shape that pulls in and introduces the skin throughout the design, so they kind of break the plane of the image and cut through the entire design. So they don't really need any more help. They'll stand out enough just on their own. Another thing that's unique about this design and why it was so important to keep the color under control as we look at the finished image here, is that we left the dragon completely gray. And with the dragon being the focal point and staying in grayscale, I really needed to stay in control of those colors and not let them get too bold, too overwhelming. So if you look at it here, my goal was to keep this design from getting too heavy. I wanted it to be fairly feminine. I wanted it to look light and airy on her leg, and I think that this pulls it off. I think that the skin tone introduced throughout it does pretty well. Once it's healed, those blues will settle in, those reds will settle down a little bit, and I think it'll read as a nice cohesive design with that fits the body well and is nice and light and airy. And without the use of a limited color palette, constantly thinking about what the most important shapes were, constantly remembering where my light source was and keeping my dark and light families separate, and then using my edges to support that hierarchy, I wouldn't have gotten that effect. It took all of those things working together to get the effect that I was going for. So I hope that helped. We'll do another one of these things soon, and thank you for supporting the Fireside Tattoo Network. Hey, that's it. Hope you got some value out of that. I want to thank my client Erin for letting me film her thigh for hours and hours on end. If you'd like to learn more about foundations, click the link below. You can watch other videos and read about it and see if it's something you might be interested in. Otherwise, thanks as always for supporting what we do, and we will see you next time.